You're right there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things old and related, and welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. In this one, we are going to add another unit to Jason's Chaos Army, and it's going to get noisy. Take care lest your protests grow tiresome. I have asked for so little. Anyone would think I had asked you to sacrifice yourselves and all your families. And yet, in Slanesh's boundless and pleasing mercy, I have asked only for your daughters. Surely you would not deny me my small enjoyments. Noise Marines are originally Emperor's Children Marines who have dedicated themselves wholeheartedly to the Chaos God Slanesh. This has affected their hearing in a way that makes it 1,000 times sharper than any normal person and allows them to distinguish the subtlest difference in pitch and volume in music. This affects the Noise Marine's brain, causing extreme emotional reaction that make all other sensations pale and worthless. The louder and more discordant the noise, the more extreme the emotional reaction provoked, until only the din of battle and screams of the enemy can stir the Noise Marine. His mind ceases to function and becomes a mere receptacle for the sensations ignited by the music of the apocalypse and the screams of the dying as they dance upon the path of destruction. This one was the original model for the Noise Marines that came out around about the Rogue Trader time, I believe. And we're not going to be looking at that, although I do have a new version that was released not so long ago, slightly updated sculpt, which if people are interested in seeing me paint, put it in the comments below and I'll do that later on for a video. The Noise Marines we are going to be doing are these ones, which appeared in White Dwarf 206, where they appeared with a much more different sculpt than they used to have, which gives them a decidedly Slaneshi feel to them, if you ask me, with some bright coloured flames and skull detailing all over them, which really makes them stand out. And they also have some very interesting weapons. This one is called the Blastmaster, and it has some special rules. And those are that the power of the blast can vary tremendously, so that some blasts will be more powerful than others. You can determine this before every attack by rolling a d6 and adding 4 to the result, and this gives you the strength. Now it does gives it quite a variety of strengths from anything from 5 to 10, but it just adds to that effect of chaotic energy to these weapons, if you ask me. And this weapon also has an increased effectiveness against armour, which is shown with its increased armour penetration of 3d6 plus 8. And it also has a 2-inch blast marker, but it's a move or fire, which means you cannot move and fire this weapon. It's move or fire. And we have this weapon here, which is called the Sonic Blaster. This is the more common weapon that the Noise Marines use. And it's got a pretty decent range of 32 inches, as well as an armor saving modifier of -2. And you can also use 2 sustained fire dice with it. And then the final weapon that they came out with for these Noise Marines was the Doom Siren. This is a different type of weapon. They don't actually carry it. It basically attaches to their helmet and amplifies their screams and shouts as they go into war. And it also has a template that came in the Chaos Codex for 2nd edition, which you could photocopy and take out. And the Doom Siren is actually more powerful the closer you are. So for example, if you're only 3 inches away, that's a strength 7 attack. Whereas if you're stretching it right out to 21 inches, it's only a strength 1 attack. And interestingly enough, its save modifier is actually related to the strength of the weapon that you're using, but halved. But you always round down. So if you're firing at maximum strength 7, that gives you an armor save modifier of -3, and the armor penetration of the Doom Siren against vehicles and other armor targets is equal to its strength at the point it hits, plus 1d6, which is also quite interesting. And the Noise Marines themselves actually come with a couple of special rules which make them quite interesting. Firstly, as you can see, all Noise Marines come with the mark of Slanesh, which means they are completely immune to psychology and will never break. And it also states that Noise Marines receive the mark of Slanesh for free and do not have to pay any points for it, which is really interesting. And then they have the final special rule, which is the Psychic Cacophony. And it's basically, as it states in the rules, psychic cacophony of babbling, screaming, braying and other disorientating noises which will distract any psychers nearby. It does state that demons are not affected by this, as they quite enjoy the noise, apparently especially greater demons of Nurgle, who it says here like to dance along to the music in quite a cheerful manner, which which is one of the things, frankly, I love about Nurgle. Nurgle is probably one of the happiest Chaos Gods going. Now, what this Psychic Cacophony does is it affects any Psykers within 16 inches of the Noise Marine attempting to use a Psychic power. Now, this also includes friendly Psykers. So, Chaos Psyker, Imperial Psyker, Eldar Psyker, doesn't matter. They do not like this noise. And what you do for the Psychic Cacophony is any Psykers that are within 16 inches of the Noise Marine, you roll a d6 when they attempt to cast a Psychic power. And if the Noise Marine player rolls a number higher than the Psyker's mastery level, that means that the Psychic power is instantly and automatically nullified. And it also states that war gear that normally protects against psychic attacks, such as an Aegis suit, does not offer any protection against the Noise Marines. It also states that any Psyker that is affected by this will suffer a single wound if you roll a 4, 5 or 6 with no saving throw of any type allowed. And this ability also applies to aspiring champions leading a unit of Noise Marine. Now, this makes them very powerful against Psykers, especially low-level Psykers. If you've got a level 1 Psyker, all the Noise Marine player would have to do is roll a 2+ to nullify that power. And then if he then rolls a 4, 5 or 6 afterwards and you suffer a wound, that's your Psyker gone. So that's an extremely useful ability. So not only does this unit stand out on the tabletop very nicely because of its dark armour and bright colours, it also has some special powers and abilities which make it extremely potent on the tabletop in certain situations. I'm very curious to see how Jason uses these guys. Now, as I said, we're not going to be painting the original Noise Marine, we are going to be painting these ones that came out for 2nd edition. So grab yourself your cuppa and let's get to the painting desk. The first stage in painting these models is going to be to strip off the black undercoating and any other paint that's on some of the parts. Not all of the parts have them, but most of the parts have something. So I've got an old cup. If you're going to use a cup, use one that you don't mind ruining and never using again. Take the models off the base. Remember, if you're using acetone to strip off paint, do not put plastic models, parts or bases or anything like that into the acetone. The acetone will destroy the parts very, very quickly. But it's just the same old trick of putting them in a cup or anything that's not plastic, that's big enough to hold all the parts, and then you want to cover them in your acetone. There you go. Basically just covered them. Make sure they're all nicely covered. You can see how quickly it turns the acetone darker by how quickly it'll strip the paint off. And it's just a case of leave them there for anything from a few minutes up to overnight at most if you really want to strip some stubborn stuff off. Once they've come out of the acetone, I then prime them up using GW's Rattle Can Grey Sear. This gives quite a nice bright base coat, and we're going to be using contrast paints for the main base colours for quite a lot, so it makes sense to use that. Now, I'm going to show you with this one, but we are going to bring in the various different body types for the different colours. And the first colour I'm going to go to is, again, it's a GW contrast paint, and it's Black Templar. I'm using this one because when it goes down, it's not quite fully opaque, so it gives us space to do the next step. I'm basically going to put this over all of the armour, except for the trim, any pipes or anything like that, and I'm also going to put this over any of the areas that we're going to want to be metallic, so the golds or the gunmetal colours. Like I said, this is one of the more time-consuming parts of this paint job, especially going around the fancy trim that they have, which we're going to be painting in bright colours later. So you want to get yourself a good video on in the background, have some patience and just go around filling it in. Once the Black Templar has dried, I'm going to be going in with another GW contrast paint. And this one is going to be to get that bluish tint to the armour that we want. What I'm going to use is Leviathan Blue. And this is a very, very, very dark blue, pretty much black. And what we're going to do is paint this over all of the areas of the armour that we want to be this deep blue colour. You don't really have to worry about doing it over any of the areas that we're going to be doing gold or silver though. But it doesn't matter if you happen to get some of the paint on there, not the end of the world. And again, we are going to want to be just as careful with this Leviathan Blue as we were with the Black Templar as we're going around the flame details. So just like before, put yourself some music or a video on in the background and just work around the model putting this over any of the black that you want to be the armour. Now, before I show you how to paint the different coloured flames, I'm going to go through and do the colours that are pretty much universal to all three different types. To begin with, what I'm going to do is use Warpstone Glow. And I'm going to use these to paint some of the tubes around the models. For example, the ones here on their backpack, and on this particular model, they're also on tubes going up his chest here. I'm also going to use this on these gargoyles on the muzzles of the Blastmaster. And I'm also going to do the champion's chainsword in this. After I've done the Warpstone Glow, I'm going to move on to doing the red areas. And for that, I'm going to use Vallejo Game Colours Scarlet Blood. There's a few places that this is going to go on. There's some piping and cabling on some of the Noise Marine's chests, as well as the barrels of both the Sonic Blaster and the Blastmaster. There's also some buttons around them, as well as some arrows and other bits. I'll be using this red as well on the inner pipes of the backpack. This is the same for all of the models. I've also used this red for their eye bits here as well. I'm also going to be using this red on the champion's Power Claw. The next colour I'm going to move on to is Xerius Purple, and I'm going to use that on the tongue that he got sticking out. I'm also going to be using it on this sort of amplifier box, wherever it is on the side of him. And I also use this purple on the sort of gargoyle muzzle for the Sonic Blaster. The last colour I'm going to be using for some of the cabling and wiring is going to be Sotek Green. And there's just a couple of wires knocking about the various different sculpts. For this one, you've got these little ones just around here, as well as some of the sculpts have got wiring on their helmets as well. After that, I'm going to take some Ushakti bone and use that to paint the skull that is on the chainsword for the champion. Now, before we actually get to doing the flames, there's a couple more things to do, and that's going to be the metallics. To begin with, I'm going to start with anything that's going to be a silvery colour. So for that, I'm going to be using Vallejo Game Colours Chainmail. That's going to be areas on most of the body of the Blastmaster, as well as the chains on the weapon. There's also all the parts on the Sonic Blaster. There are also some grills on the backpack and on the bodies of the actual Noise Marines themselves, as well as the grill on the front of the Doom Siren, as well as these parts on the champion's Power Claw. For any of the gold detailing, I'm going to use Vallejo Game Colours Glorious Gold. These details are scattered all over the models, on the weapons and most of the spikes. And they also all have an awful lot of these tiny little studs. This is one of those, and this is another one of those where it's going to take a little while to go around and pick them all out. So just have yourself some nice music or a good video on in the background and go over the models until you get them all. On the Blastmaster here, you'll see that this gargoyle's heads have a couple of horns coming off them. I'm going to use for these Vallejo Game Colours Glacier Blue. Now this is an almost white, but not quite, with a little hint of blue in it. Now both the Sonic Blaster and the Blastmaster have got what look like keys on them. To base coat the white ones, I'm just going to use some pure white. Dotted around the Noise Marines are some gems. I'm just going to paint these very quickly for you. Very red gems. I'm going to start with a base coat of Mephiston Red, whilst trying to leave the top little parts of them black. For any green gems, I'm going to do the same, but with Incubi Darkness. And for the purple gems, I'm going to base coat those in Nagaroth Night. And it's now time to move on to the flame detailing around the models. First one I'm going to show you is this body here. And I'm going to start with the skulls that are on it. And for those, I'm going to give them a base coat of Gauss Blaster Green. And a bit of a change, seeing as I'm doing the Exalted Champion with this body instead of a Sonic Blaster, I'm actually going to mix up the armor panel detailing on the Powerfish a little bit, and I'm going to add Gauss Blaster Green to this bottom one as well. You can do it to any particular one, this just adds a little bit of variation. And then for the pink flames, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1 part GW Contrast Paints Volupus Pink and thin it down with 4 parts of GW's Contrast Medium. And we're just going to work around all the flames, filling these in as careful as we can. Next one I'm going to do is this one here, and it's going to have the blue flames on there. And the base colour I'm going to use for these is a Games Workshop colour called Temple Guard Blue. The final flame details to do are on this one, and it's the yellow type. For that, I'm going to use GW's Dawn Yellow. And once these are done, that's actually all the base colours completed, and we can move on to doing the washes. The first wash I'm going to use is going to be Seraphim Sepia, and I'm going to use that on the skull on the chainsword, as well as the skull that is one of the Noise Marine's shoulder pads. And Seraphim Sepia is actually quite close, in colour at least, from what I remember as the original chestnut ink, but it's a lot weaker. So when you're doing this, a good little tip is to actually load quite a bit onto your brush at some point, but specifically put it in the deeper recesses, such as the nostrils and any more defined detailing on the skull, and sort of just dab it in there so that it collects more in those recesses. Then for anything that I've done green, I'm going to use GW's Bale Tan Green for a wash for these. I also use Bale Tan Green on the Gauss Blaster Green bits that I've done as well. For anything that we've done red, I'm going to use Caribou Crimson. For the purple, like the tongue, this little amplifier thing on the side of him, and the gargoyle muzzle of the Sonic Blaster, I'm going to give them a wash of Druchii Violet. For the Glacier Blue horns, I'm going to give them a sort of a wash over of Gilliman Blue Glaze. And this is that older paint that was cancelled by GW a while ago. You can get pretty close to this if you were to use something like GW's contrast paint Talassar Blue, but thin it down quite a lot, and I do mean a lot. Like, you would probably have to thin it down something like 7 or 8 parts of contrast medium to 1 part of Talassar Blue. Over any of the chain mail areas, we're going to go over that with Nuln Oil. I also put the Nuln Oil directly into the eye sockets of the skulls on the armour here, as well as the eye sockets on this skull, as well as the nostrils, as well as basically any of the other eye sockets that are on any skulls that are on any of these sculpts. For the yellow flame details, I'm going to use a GW wash called Cassandora Yellow. The final parts to wash on these is going to be these blue parts. For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mix of 4 parts GW Contrast Medium to 1 part Contrast Paint Talassar Blue. Now that all the washes are done, we can move on to the highlights. And the first one I'm going to start with is Moot Green, which is going to be going on everything that we've done green. So that's going to be a lot of the cables that are going all over these Noise Marines, as well as the muzzle of the Master Blaster. Some of these you'll find you'll be able to sort of overbrush them. But if you hold the brush sideways and skim the bristles over the detail, then you'll be able to pick them out like that, which is a lot easier than trying to pick them out individually. Some of the other ones you will have to individually pick out the detailing on the pipe work, but if you keep a steady hand, they're not too difficult to do. And for the sort of gargoyle head for the muzzle weapon, I'm just going to carefully pick out the raised detail with Moot Green. The final highlight for these green sort of gargoyle things, Moot is going to be a mix of GW's Moot Green and about equal parts Vallejo Game Colours Bile Green. And with this much brighter green, we're just going to pick out some of the smaller, more refined details of these gargoyle heads, like the top of the ears around here, and a few other little bits. The next one I'm going to move on to is the reds. And the first step as that is going to be to reapply Scarlet Blood, whilst leaving the recesses darker. And this step is going to be done on the weapon barrels, buttons that may appear anywhere on the model, as well as the Exalted Champion's Power Claw. I'm then going to use Vallejo Model Colours Clear Orange to pick out the ridges on any of the cabling, as well as any buttons that are around the models. On the barrels of their weapons, I'm going to be doing a thin line of this, going across the top of it like that. And then to finish off the red highlighting, I'm going to take some Vallejo Game Colours Orange Fire and just add the tiniest little bit of it to the top of the highlights on the weapon barrels. For any of the cables that you've done Sotec Green, it's just going to be a very nice simple highlight of Temple Guard Blue. Now if we move on to the purple. To begin with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reapply Xerius Purple to both this little amplifier box on the hip of this guy, as well as the gargoyle that is on the front of the Sonic Blaster. And we are of course going to leave the recesses, that darker colour we had left over from the washes. I then move on to Gene Stealer Purple, and that's going to go on as an edge highlight on that little amplifier box, as well as picking out the ridges on this sort of a tongue thing that's sticking out of his mouth. And it's also going to be used to pick out the detailing on the gargoyle head. And then for the final highlight on the tongue and on the gargoyle head, I'm actually going to use a GW airbrush paint called Cacophony Purple. This is basically the Carla Lilac, but a little bit darker. And where it is an airbrush paint, it's also very, very thin. So when you're doing it over the gargoyle head, you'll be building this up over several layers. And if you want to, you can also put a bit of this Cacophony Purple just on the very corner of this sort of amplifier box, just to add a little bit of brightness to it. Now there are one or two completely black parts, like the keys on this weapon, as well as there's some keys on the other weapon as well, and a couple other little bits. And for that, I'm just going to use Vallejo Model Colours Neutral Grey. For the metallic areas, I'm going to start by reapplying chainmail to all of the silvery metallic areas, whilst leaving the recesses darker. Then to finish off the gunmetal areas, I'm going to go to Vallejo Game Colours Silver and just pick out some of the more raised and defined edges, as well as any rivets that are around the sculpt. I'm now going to move on to highlighting the gold. And to begin with, I'm going to reapply Glorious Gold, whilst leaving some of the recesses this warmer brown tone. I then move on to Vallejo Game Colours Polished Gold and pick out the rivets, as well as any more sharper and defined edges. Now then, for the gems that we started with Incubi Darkness, I'm going to begin with highlighting them with Warpstone Glow and paint this down towards the bottom part of the gems, whilst leaving that little black dot in the top part. I'm then going to go to Moot Green and do a nice thin line of it around the bottom edge of the gemstone. And then to finish it off, we take a bit of pure white and do a little dot of it on the bit that we've left black. As well as a small bit of it on the Moot Green line opposite the white dot that we've just done. For any gems that you started with Mephiston Red, we are going to go in with some Vallejo Game Colours Scarlet Blood and do the same as we did for those green gems and try and paint this just along the bottom part of the gem whilst leaving that top part black, like that. And I'm then going to go to Vallejo Game Colours Orange Fire, do that little line across the bottom part of it like this, and then that little dot of pure white to finish it off. And then finally, for any of the gems that you've done with a base coat of Nagaroth Night, I'm going to go to Gene Stealer Purple to begin with, paint this lower part of the gem in. I then go up to Decala Lilac, do the bright line around the bottom of it, and then finish off with the white dots. Now, doing them like this, you can do your gems any colour you like. They don't have to be the ones that we've shown here. All you have to do is to remember to go from black in the main part of it with some very stark jumps from a very dark colour up to a brighter colour and then almost a white. And that will give the impression of a shiny reflective surface. To highlight the skull that we've done on the chainsword, I'm going to go back in with Ushakti Bone and just paint this over the raised areas of the skull. And then we finish off by taking a little bit of Screaming Skull and adding it to the very highest points of any of the bone detailing. For the black armour, we want to maintain that sort of blue appearance. So the first colour I'm going to use when it comes to highlighting these is going to be GW's Thunderhawk Blue. And the hardest bit when it comes to highlighting with this is working your way around a lot of all the little flame details that are actually on the models. And unfortunately, there's no easy way of doing this other than just to very, very patiently and with a nice thin brush work your way around them. It is a very time-consuming process, but you don't have to follow all of the flame details. Just pick out some of the more prominent areas, such as around the higher points of them. And then to finish off the highlights on the black armour, I'm going to go on to GW's Rust Grey. And this is just going to be used to pick out some of the more very tips of the armour, as well as the top parts of any of the more prominent detail. And where you've got some of the sculpted face details, such as on this one's armour here, as well as on their heads, we're going to use this Rust Grey to pick out most of this as well. For highlighting these horns that are on this gargoyle's head on the end of the Master Blaster, I'm just going to take some Glacier Blue again, and as carefully as I can, paint in the ridges of the bone, which you can just about see. Now, this detail is quite awkward to see, so if you can't actually make it out yourself, you don't have to follow it exactly. Just do some quick little lines in this Glacier Blue so it adds the impression of ridges in a bone structure. It's now time to move on to highlighting the flame detailing that's around these models. And I'm going to begin with this sort of pastel pink one. The first step in highlighting these is to take some GW's Fulgrim Pink and thin this down a bit more than you normally would do, and carefully glaze it in going towards the furthest tips. And then to finish off the pink flames, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some pure white and mix that in with the Fulgrim Pink until it's a lot brighter. And then I'm going to use this to very carefully pick out the edges of some of the flames and the rivets. For these green skulls, I'm going to start by reapplying Gauss Blaster Green. And then to finish off the green, what I'll do is I'll do the same sort of mix with pure white and Gauss Blaster Green, make it a lot brighter, and use that to pick out the more defined parts of these detailing. For the blue ones, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reapply Temple Guard Blue, but again thin this down and start at the base of the flames and work our way up to the top. And when it comes to the face, I'm just going to, as carefully as I can, pick out the more defined details. And then to finish off the blue flames, I'm going to go up to GW's Baharoth Blue and just use this to pick out the edges of the flames. And for the face, I'm just going to pick out as finely as I can the more prominent details. So that would be the bridge of the nose, the bridge of the brow, and around his mouth. We want to try and keep these lines as thin as you can. And now for the final one, which is the yellow flame detailing. To begin with, I'm going to go back in with Dawn Yellow and thin that down, and do the same where we apply it going up towards the tip of the flames. And then again, to finish these off, we take some white, mix it in with the Dawn Yellow, and pick out the rivets and the edges of any of the flame detailings and trim. And with that, that is actually all of the highlighting done. So all that remains to be done is to give them their Warboss green and sawdust flock bases, varnish them up, and then we will have them for the final reveal. And here they are, all finished up and ready for the tabletop. The bright colours on the armour really make this unit stand out, and when they're in amongst that army that I'm actually doing for Jason, these guys are going to stand out even more, because that army is mostly all purple, whereas these guys have got a very interesting mix of very bright colours. So they'll stand out beautifully on the tabletop. As you can see, what I've done is I've mixed up the combination of the colours that I've used, so the yellows, blues, greens and the pinks. And I've done them on the models in different combinations, so it adds some individuality to the individual models, even though we've got the same sculpts repeated quite a few times in this collection of models. And here we've got 2 units of 3, along with the Exalted Champion. And with these colours mixed up the way they are, you can actually have 3 models in a unit that have got completely different colour combinations. And this really does help and adds a nice little touch to them. And I really hope you've enjoyed this video. And there's only a couple of units left to do to finish off Jason's army. So those videos should hopefully be coming quite soon. If you're enjoying the content so far, down in the description below there'll be a link to my Ko-fi account where you can make little donations or anything else like that you feel like doing to help fund the channel. There is also a link to my commission painting website where you can go and see some galleries of previous work that I've done, as well as some price lists for the different painting tiers that are available if you would like to get a commission done. As I said, I do hope you've enjoyed this video. Stay smiling and keep the old hammer alive.